So we've got a 9mm, a 22 caliber. Both of these have already been sold for $3,500 a piece. And then there's an AR-15 here that's been sold for $5,000. And there's a Colt 45 here and a Glock.
This is only a tiny fraction of the guns recently seized by U.S. federal authorities before the weapons could be trafficked across the border into Mexico. But guess where these guns and many others came from before they could be smuggled across the border?
We were able to tell that some of the guns were purchased in the Middle District of Florida.
Gang terror caught on surveillance footage, a barrage of bullets, 40 of them fired on a street corner while an innocent family with a baby walks by and ducks down for their lives. Another man runs through the lobby of a building. Behind him, gunshots are fired. Everyone inside runs and gets down. Then there's another who's staked out inside a sneaker store. There he is, they say. A half hour later, he leaves and gets shot in the middle of a public street in Bay Ridge. 2 innocent bystanders are also shot.
Mexican cartels aren't just terrorizing their own country, they're bringing the violence straight to American soil, armed with US-bought weapons. Through straw buyers and smuggling networks, these criminals are stockpiling high-powered firearms, using them to battle law enforcement and expand their grip on both sides of the border. Shocking investigations reveal that cartels have infiltrated Southern California, running illegal marijuana farms, stealing resources, and forcing residents out with brutal intimidation tactics. With drones capturing their operations and experts sounding the alarm, one thing is clear: cartel influence in the US is deeper, deadlier, and more bloody than ever before. The guns that end up in the hands of Mexican cartels don't come from some hidden underground factory in Mexico. As a matter of fact, there's only one gun store in the entire country, making it nearly impossible for anyone to legally or even illegally get their hands on a firearm. But the cartels, they have no problem getting their hands on them. That's because most of their weapons come straight from the US. Now the crazy thing is that the guns are legally bought and then smuggled to Mexico, where they quickly turn into weapons of warfare. Every year, at least 200,000 firearms are trafficked from the United States into Mexico. And once they cross the border, these guns fuel brutal cartel violence that spills over into both countries. Now, the process of getting these guns is disturbingly simple. It all starts with people called straw buyers. These are ordinary-looking US citizens with clean records who walk into gun stores and buy weapons on behalf of cartel traffickers. So, they don't plan to keep the guns for themselves. Instead, they hand them over to smugglers who move them across the border in cars, trucks, or even hidden compartments inside freight shipments.
This is only a tiny fraction of the guns recently seized by U.S. federal authorities before the weapons could be trafficked across the border into Mexico. But guess where these guns and many others came from before they could be smuggled across the border?
We were able to tell that some of the guns were purchased in the Middle District of Florida.
U.S. Middle District of Florida Attorney Roger Handberg says within the past 12 months, his office has been busy sending gun traffickers to prison.
We've prosecuted at least 20 different defendants who've been involved in trafficking more than 400 firearms. We've seen the firearms attempting to go to Mexico.
Handberg says the guns seized by federal law enforcement officers were intended to go to Mexican drug cartels and crime organizations throughout Central America and the Caribbean. But these aren't guns that were stolen out of cars or someone's home and then sold on the street. Federal authorities say many of the guns that are being sent to the Mexican drug cartels and even the organized crime syndicates in the Caribbean are actually purchased from gun stores here in the U.S. That's right, Americans who are legally allowed to purchase firearms are knowingly arming those organizations through a transaction called a straw purchase.
One of the most well-known cases of straw purchasing happened in 2010 when a man named Uriel Patino walked into a gun shop in Phoenix, Arizona. Over the next several months, he bought over 700 firearms, including dozens of AK-47s and .50 caliber sniper rifles. These guns ended up in the hands of the Sinaloa cartel, one of the most powerful and violent criminal organizations in the world. Some of those weapons were later found at crime scenes in Mexico. One of them, a .50 caliber Barrett sniper rifle, was used in a deadly firefight that left Mexican police officers dead. Another rifle from that same batch was linked to the murder of U.S. Border Patrol agent Brian Terry in December 2010. His death exposed a failed undercover operation called Fast and Furious, where federal agents allowed guns to be sold to traffickers, hoping to trace them back to cartels. But instead of tracking the weapons, authorities lost control of them, and many ended up in cartel hands, leading to hundreds of deaths.
I had an intel analyst come to me one day who had specialized in the cartels for years. And he said to me, hey, I've got some stuff you may want to see. it was instantly apparent that the cartels had large-scale covert weapons trafficking networks all across the U.S.
Now, what's shocking is that Patino wasn't the only one doing this. Hundreds of similar buyers were doing the same thing, using fake addresses and straw purchasing methods to flood Mexico with American-made guns. But straw purchasing is just one way cartels get their weapons. Another major source is private sales and gun shows. In many states, there are little to no background checks required for private gun sales. This means that one person can sell a gun to another without any paperwork, making it nearly impossible for law enforcement to track these transactions. Gun shows, which happen regularly in states like Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico, are hotspots for cartel gun buyers. All they have to do is show up with cash, and they can walk away with as many firearms as they want, no questions asked. Once these guns are purchased, the next step is getting them into Mexico, and smuggling guns across the border is surprisingly easy. Most people assume that illegal weapons are hidden in the backs of trucks or stuffed into secret compartments, but the truth is, many guns are smuggled right through official border checkpoints. Corrupt officials, including Mexican customs agents, have been caught looking the other way while gun traffickers move shipments into cartel territories.
So we've got a 9mm, a 22 caliber. Both of these have already been sold for $3,500 apiece. And then there's an AR-15 here that's been sold for $5,000. And there's a Colt 45 here and a Glock.
One of the most brazen smuggling operations ever caught on camera happened in 2016 at a border crossing between Texas and Mexico. Exclusive surveillance footage showed a group of traffickers unloading crates of weapons in broad daylight, including a Barrett sniper rifle and stacks of high-powered rifles. Within minutes, the traffickers finished their job and drove away, leaving behind an abandoned truck that had been reported stolen. Once the guns make it across the border, they move very quickly, spreading across the country and into the hands of different criminal groups. A report from the ATF's Houston office found that some of the guns they traced to cartel violence in Mexico had been purchased in Texas and Arizona only a few days earlier. In one case, a Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle was recovered just 5 days after it had been sold in the US. That means the gun was bought, smuggled, and used in a crime within a single week. Of all the varieties of guns available to them, the .50 caliber sniper rifle has become the cartel's favorite weapon, and for good reason. This beast can punch through armored vehicles, hit a target from over a mile away, and even bring down helicopters. In 2019, when the Mexican military tried to capture Ovidio Guzman, the son of El Chapo, the Sinaloa cartel fought back with a fleet of .50 caliber rifles. They were so powerful that Mexican soldiers were forced to release Guzman just to stop the bloodshed. Even though federal agents know these weapons are coming from the US and have tried to crack down on traffickers, the truth is that the system is broken. The agencies in charge admit they're outnumbered and underfunded. The ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, has only 2,500 agents worldwide, a fraction of what's needed to stop gun smuggling on such a massive scale. Even when they do track a weapon back to its buyer, most traffickers walk free because gun laws in the US make it incredibly hard to prosecute them. In recent years, Mexican cartels have expanded their operations into various US cities. These guys are not just smuggling drugs anymore, they're bringing violence directly to our doorsteps. On November 5th, 2024, a migrant named Abraham Sosa was arrested in a Bronx subway station in New York City. Sosa was found urinating in a subway tunnel, and when officers confronted him, he resisted arrest. In fact, he and associate Christopher Mayrin allegedly assaulted NYPD officers during the arrest. It was during this scuffle that officers discovered a loaded AR-15 rifle in his backpack.
The man is facing charges for bringing a loaded machine gun into a subway station in the Bronx. Police say Abraham Sosa walked into the subway tunnel to relieve himself in the Kingsbridge station yesterday afternoon. Officers followed, and when they asked for his ID, he refused to show it and then resisted an attempt to arrest him. During the struggle, the machine gun fell out of his backpack. Sosa is facing charges including assault and criminal possession of a weapon. 2 officers suffered minor injuries. A 21-year-old man is also charged with interfering with Sosa's arrest and stealing an officer's cell phone.
Shockingly, despite the seriousness of the charges against him, Sosa was released from jail after posting a $25,000 bond. It's really disappointing that such a dangerous individual was allowed back into the streets of New York with millions of innocent citizens. Meanwhile, in Chicago, the influence of the cartels has also also intensified gang conflicts, leading to a surge in shootings and homicides. The Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, reported that Mexican transnational criminal organizations, particularly the Sinaloa cartel, have established strong ties with local gangs, supplying them with narcotics and firearms. These weapons, often traced back to U.S. origins, have been used in numerous violent crimes across the city. In 2024 alone, Chicago experienced over 700 homicides, with a significant portion linked to gang-related activities fueled by cartel-supplied guns. The situation is equally dire in New York City. On February 5, 2025, authorities charged 14 members of the 59 Brims and Bloodhound Brim street gangs with murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy following a series of violent incidents. These gangs, operating in Brooklyn, had obtained firearms through illegal networks connected to Mexican cartels. The indictment detailed 19 shootings that resulted in 1 death and 9 injuries, including innocent bystanders. The firearms used were predominantly semi-automatic pistols and rifles smuggled into the city through the cartel's extensive trafficking networks.
More than a dozen accused gang members facing charges in connection with a slew of shootings.
They all took place in South Brooklyn, and as Fox 5's Richard G. Coas shows us, in many cases, innocent bystanders were caught in the crossfire.
Gang terror caught on surveillance footage, a barrage of bullets, 40 of them fired on a street corner while an innocent family with a baby walks by and ducks down for their lives. Another man runs through the lobby of a building. Behind him, gunshots are fired. Everyone inside runs and gets down. Then there's another who's staked out inside a sneaker store. There he is, they say. A half hour later, he leaves and gets shot in the middle of a public street in Bay Ridge. 2 innocent bystanders are also shot.
On Wednesday, January 22, 2025, a group of hikers set out to explore the Jacumba Wilderness in California, near the U.S.-Mexico border. Among them were an American citizen and a Canadian visitor. Around noon, as the hikers ventured deeper into the wilderness, 2 armed men approached them. These men, who were suspected to be members of a Mexican cartel, shouted commands in Spanish, ordering the hikers to come closer. The hikers sensed danger, but because they could not understand what they were saying, they ignored them. In response, the assailants fired 2 warning shots into the air. When the hikers still didn't comply, the gunman shot the American hiker in the leg. The attackers then robbed both the injured American and his Canadian companion, taking their cell phones and backpacks. After the assault, the gunman retreated toward the Mexican border. The Canadian hiker, despite the shock, stayed by his friend's side. He managed to call for help, and soon after, U.S. Border Patrol agents arrived at the scene. They provided immediate medical assistance and arranged for the injured hiker to be airlifted to Sharp Medical Center in San Diego. Thankfully, the hiker is expected to recover from his injuries. In response to this alarming incident, Chief Patrol Agent Gregory K. Bovino of the El Centro sector made a public statement. He emphasized that such acts of violence would not be tolerated on American soil and assured the public that the Border Patrol Tactical Unit, BORTAC, and other specialized teams are actively patrolling the area to prevent further incidents. Even with the level of harm they had already caused, the cartels are constantly evolving their deadly tactics, and now they are doing it with technology. In February 2025, some very disturbing reports circulated on the internet that Mexican drug cartels were planning to use weaponized drones to attack U.S. Border Patrol agents. According to a leaked internal memo, cartel leaders authorized the use of explosive-laden drones against U.S. law enforcement personnel operating at the Mexico-U.S. border.
We also just got our hands on a memo out of the Rio Grande Valley sector that actually says that, this is kind of crazy here, that the cartels authorize the use of weaponized drones, explosives against CBP personnel and U.S. law enforcement down there at the southern border. Check out this video that we were able to obtain through our sources that shows these bomb-wielding drones in action. So this drone literally goes over top of these vehicles. It's a convoy of vehicles you can see right there. And you can quite literally see a bomb drop from this drone and actually make contact down there. And what we've learned here is they believe that this is cartel on cartel fighting there. And that's what the concern is, that fighting is going to spill over into the United States.
For years, cartel gun smuggling between the United States and Mexico has been a crisis. The weapons come from American gun stores, make their way into cartel hands, and are used to kill, torture, and terrorize people on both sides of the border. The violence has been growing, and U.S. leaders have argued, debated, and made promises. But until recently, there was no real action. The change came in January 2025, when President Donald Trump signed an executive order officially designating 6 Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs.
Under the orders I signed today, we will also be designating the cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. I will direct our government to use the full and immense power of federal and state law enforcement to eliminate the presence of all foreign gangs and criminal networks, bringing devastating crime to U.S. soil, including our cities and inner cities.
This order specifically targeted the Sinaloa Cartel, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, the Gulf Cartel, Los Zetas, La Familia Michoacana, the Beltran Leyva organization, and even some Venezuela and El Salvadorian gangs. This was indeed a game changer because for years, cartel members were treated like criminals, arrested, charged, and sent to prison. But now, they are considered terrorists, just like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. That means the U.S. military, intelligence agencies, and federal law enforcement now have more power to go after them. The designation allows the U.S. to freeze cartel assets, block financial transactions, and even conduct military operations against cartel leadership. Almost immediately after the executive order, Trump deployed thousands of U.S. troops to the border. He sent at least 1,500 active duty soldiers to support Border Patrol, conduct surveillance, and crack down on cartel smuggling routes.
Along the southern border this morning, signs of President Trump's long-promised crackdown on immigration, as the 1,500 troops sent to the border begin their new mission. In the air and on the ground, Marines from California's Camp Pendleton now at the border wall with heavy trucks and concertina wire.
What exactly do you want them to be doing right now?
Making sure that the border is safe and secure and that criminals don't come into our country.
Within days of the deployment, cartel smugglers began shifting their routes, abandoning some of their usual smuggling methods out of fear of military confrontation. But while it seemed like President Trump's approach was working, it also triggered a major diplomatic conflict with Mexico. The Mexican government, led by President Claudia Sheinbaum, strongly opposed the U.S. labeling cartels as terrorists. Sheinbaum, who took office on October 1st, 2024, warned that the decision opened the door for direct U.S. military action on Mexican soil, which was something Mexico would never allow. She accused Trump of violating Mexican sovereignty and insisted that Mexico was capable of handling cartel violence on its own.
Mexican soldiers were mobilized to the U.S. border on Tuesday to crack down on fentanyl trafficking. It's part of a deal between U.S. President Donald Trump and Mexico's leader Claudia Sheinbaum to pause his threat of tariffs for a month.
At first, Sheinbaum refused to cooperate with Trump's demands, but then Trump hit Mexico with something they couldn't ignore: tariffs. He announced new tariffs on Mexican imports, raising taxes on cars, electronics, and agricultural products. This put immediate pressure on Mexico's economy, and after days of intense negotiations, Sheinbaum reluctantly agreed to deploy thousands of Mexican troops to the border. By February 2025, Mexico had sent at least 10,000 National Guard soldiers to its northern border to shut down cartel smuggling operations, intercept illegal gun shipments, and patrol key trafficking routes. It was one of the largest military responses to cartel violence in Mexico's history. But the problem, however, goes beyond just military action. Even with Trump's crackdown at the border, the real issue is still American guns.
The truth is, the U.S. was turning a blind eye to the flow of weapons illegally into Mexico. That is outrageous.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
You are correct. You are correct. This has been a major bipartisan failure of the United States government for many decades now. You wouldn't believe when I was raising this issue, there were people in the government who said, no, they're not really military weapons that go to Mexico, it's just handguns. But then to me, you're missing the point. They're purchasing, serious killing power.
In 2021, the Mexican government sued major U.S. gun manufacturers, including Smith & Wesson, Glock, Colt, and Barrett firearms, accusing them of deliberately allowing cartel traffickers to buy their weapons. The lawsuit demanded $10 billion in damages and included evidence that at least 70% of guns recovered in Mexico had U.S. origins. But in 2022, a federal judge dismissed the case, citing American laws that protect gun manufacturers from lawsuits. However, Mexico refused to back down.
Here we are with a manufacturers of some of the most deadly weapons on the face of the earth, and they stick their heads in the sand, say we have no obligation to anybody to monitor and discipline our distribution system.
In the same year, they filed a second lawsuit, this time targeting 5 gun stores in Arizona that were directly linked to firearms used in cartel massacres. One of the stores, Sprague's Sports in Yuma, Arizona, had sold over 200 guns that later turned up at Mexican crime scenes, including weapons used in police assassinations. The case is still ongoing, but legal experts say it's an uphill battle because America's pro-gun laws make it nearly impossible to hold gun dealers accountable.
There is no marketing to drug cartels. The Mexican government has failed in its moral obligation to its citizens to bring the cartels to justice.
Lawrence Keene, general counsel with the National Shooting Sports Foundation, says the gun manufacturers plan to seek review by the U.S. Supreme Court in early April. This report is the first time that plan has been made public.
The U.S. Congress has tried to strengthen gun laws, but progress has been slow. In June 2022, Congress passed the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which finally made gun trafficking a federal crime. This act made the provision that straw buyers, smugglers, and traffickers can now face up to 25 years in prison, but law enforcement officials say this law has had little impact because cartels keep finding new buyers, new smuggling routes, and new ways to avoid detection. At the same time, gun rights advocates in the U.S. are pushing back against any attempts to limit gun sales. In 2022, Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene ran a campaign ad showing her firing a Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle, the same gun cartels use to take down helicopters. She called the weapon a symbol of American freedom and dismissed concerns about gun smuggling as anti-gun propaganda. When Vice News reached out to Republican lawmakers to ask about illegal gun trafficking, Greene was the only one who responded, calling the issue not our problem, but law enforcement officials strongly disagree.
They're seeking a level of weaponry that outguns Mexican law enforcement authorities. We see machine guns, like the M134 minigun kit, for instance, which is used by the American military and is capable of shooting 2,000 to 4,000 rounds per minute.
There's no conceivable Second Amendment right to send weapons out of the United States to countries where they are illegal, and in fact, violating United States export control law in the process.
In February 2024, ATF Director Stephen Dettelbach testified before Congress, warning that cartel gun smuggling is a major national security threat. He showed evidence that cartels are stockpiling more American-made weapons than ever before, including military-grade sniper rifles, machine guns, and armor-piercing ammunition. He urged lawmakers to pass stricter background checks and shut down ghost gun markets, where cartels buy untraceable, homemade firearms. Now, even with Trump's executive order and troop deployment, the war is far from over. While some cartel smugglers have gone into hiding, others are adapting their strategies, using drones, tunnels, and corrupt border officials to keep the weapons flowing. The Mexican military crackdown has led to violent clashes, with reports of gun battles in border towns and cartel roadblocks on highways. Civilians are being caught in the crossfire, making it clear that this isn't just a border problem anymore, but a full-blown war. Meanwhile, Trump's tough stance on cartels has made him a hero to some and an enemy to others. Supporters say he's finally doing what past presidents were too afraid to do. Critics, however, argue that military force alone won't stop cartel operations, but only push the violence further underground. With both the U.S. and Mexico sending troops to the border, the situation is more intense than ever. For the first time in history, cartels are facing direct military pressure from both sides. But with billions of dollars at stake, deeply rooted corruption, and cartel networks stretching across both countries, the question remains, can the government on both sides of the border keep up with this fight for the longest time? Feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more crime stories. Click on any of the cards on your screen right now to watch more of our videos.